Hello, my name is Kieran Hayes, and today we're going to be looking at the Nikon Z8 versus the Z6iii to see which one is right for you. You might be thinking this is going to be very straightforward and the Z8 is the clear winner here, but it's not quite that easy, as both these cameras have their pros and cons. So, come on, let's get into it and I'll tell you all about them. So yes, these cameras are similar in lots of ways, as they are both professional series bodies, have advanced autofocus, and both have the same X-Speed 7 processor. But that's where the similarities kind of end, as the sensors in these cameras are completely different. But before we get into more of those details, let's have a look at their prices. The Nikon Z8 costs roughly about $4,000, and the Z6iii costs about $2,500. So the Z8 would obviously have to be clearly the better camera here for you to consider this massive price difference, right? And yes, of course it is in a lot of ways, but in all honesty, a lot of people don't need the Z8. So looking at build quality and EVFs now, both these cameras have magnesium alloy and carbon composite bodies, and both have pro-grade weather sealing. They both feel fairly rugged, but the Z8 does feel a bit more robust than the Z6iii. It just feels a bit beefier and a bit more sturdy in the hand. The Z6iii has one advantage here though, and that's with the EVF, with its 5.76 million dots and 120 Hz refresh rate. And it's also super bright, which all combines to give you incredible detail. The Nikon Z8 uses a 3.69 million dot EVF, but it has Nikon's blackout-free dual stream technology, which is great when tracking fast-moving subjects. The Z6iii's flip-out screen, this is something you're either going to love or hate. Personally, this was something I was waiting for years, and after a week of using it, I wasn't a fan. But after a month or so, I didn't mind it at all, and I do find it's incredibly useful at times. So let's just say this screen is going to divide people. It's as simple as that. Now, of course, as you can see, there's also a physical size difference between the two cameras, with the Z8 being the bigger and heavier model. But thankfully, the Z6iii is also slightly bigger than the Z6ii was. So the grip is just a bit larger, and it just makes it a bit more comfortable. But in saying that, hand-holding both of these cameras with a long lens attached, even for an 8-hour commercial shoot, still feels good, thankfully, as they both have that kind of old-world DSLR feel to them, with the Z8 having the edge here, obviously enough, due to its shape, size, weight, and it just feels a bit beefier. Now, a point to note here though is, if you travel a lot or use a gimbal, the Z6iii is going to be easier to work with due to its smaller size and weight, of course, so this could be a massive deciding factor for you. So looking at the resolutions now, the Nikon Z8 has 46 megapixel sensor, so it has to be the clear winner here, as it gives you the option to crop heavily, which is very handy for wildlife, sports, and those trips where you might not be able to bring a longer focal length lens with you, or if you want to make massive prints too as well, of course. Now, the drawback of this is huge file sizes, so just be aware of that. This is going to cost you a lot more on both card storage and file storage. The Z6iii has a 24 megapixel sensor, so it's a bit more modest, but it's actually kind of a sweet spot for many shooters, as it gives you smaller files, making it a lot easier for storage and also slightly better noise handling in low light situations. For most photographers, 24 megapixels is more than enough. So sticking with sensors now, let's have a look at sensor technology. And the Nikon Z8's stack sensor, this basically means the imaging layer is stacked with on-chip memory. This allows the camera to read data extremely quickly, almost eliminating rolling shutter, enabling very high burst speeds and making 8K video possible. The Nikon Z6iii partially stacked sensor is a newer design. It isn't as fast as fully stacked sensors, but it's much quicker than older backside illuminated sensors. It keeps rolling shutter under control and allows oversampled 4K 60p video, and all at a lower cost, thankfully. Stacked sensors are better for ultimate speed and pro sports, while a partially stacked sensor gives you most of the benefits without the steep price tag. Then looking at dynamic range now, and the Nikon Z8 again has a nice advantage here with 14.2 stops of dynamic range, while the Z6iii is about 1 stop lower. Some of this is also due to the lower base ISO of ISO 64 on the Z8 compared to ISO 100 on the Nikon Z6iii. Now, in saying that, the difference in dynamic range does even out as you rise up in higher ISOs like ISO 800 and onwards, to such an extent that you wouldn't actually notice it. If you do a lot of high contrast, extreme outdoor work, or want every ounce of highlights and shadow retention, the Nikon Z8 is the stronger tool here. But for day-to-day, normal shooting conditions, they both work faultlessly and deliver excellent results. Looking at burst rates and how many frames per second they can capture, the Z6iii can shoot at 14 frames per second in RAW with its mechanical shutter. It also offers JPEG burst modes of 30 frames per second in full resolution or 60 and 120 frames per second at lower resolutions. The Z8 can shoot at 20 frames per second RAW and can push 30 frames with full resolution JPEG, or 60 to 120 frames in reduced resolution, but still higher resolution than the Z6iii can manage at those speeds. The buffer is also deeper on the Z8, but please do keep in mind those 45 megapixel RAW files are huge, so card speeds are going to matter a lot more here. And oh, by the way, both cameras also have pre-release capture in them. For sheer speed tricks, the Z6iii does a good job, but the Nikon Z8 is unbeatable for maximum speed here. So this brings us to autofocus, and both cameras are using Nikon's latest XSpeed 7 processor with subject detection for people, animals, vehicles and more. You also get 3D tracking that sticks really well to moving subjects. And incidentally, I have videos on how to set up both of these cameras for amazing autofocus results in the description down below, so do make sure to check that out. For the Z8, because of the stacked sensor though, autofocus information is updated more quickly. So when subjects are moving extremely fast, like birds in flight or pro-level sports, you can get a tiny bit but meaningful edge in reliability on focus here. The Z6iii is still excellent and a huge upgrade over the Z6ii. In all honesty, in most situations, you won't miss that stacked advantage. Apart from wildlife and sports maybe, where again that extra cropping ability in the Z8 is huge. Looking at rolling shutter in photography then, the Nikon Z8 with its stacked sensor has an extremely fast readout time of around 3 to 4 milliseconds. That means electronic shutter is practically distortion free. The Z6iii is a big improvement over the previous generations, but it still has a 14 to 15 millisecond of a readout. Now, that's fast enough for most shoots, but if you pan very quickly or capture very fast moving subjects, you may still see bending verticals in your results. Looking at high ISO now, the Z6iii with 24 megapixels, each pixel is larger, so per pixel noise looks a bit cleaner in very dark conditions. That can be helpful for events or weddings where you're pushing ISO 6400 and beyond. The Z8 then, noise is a little bit more visible per pixel, but once you downsize to the same output size, the difference is smaller between the Z8 and the Z6iii. But the Z6iii still has a slight advantage here. In saying that, both cameras handle high ISOs very well. The colouring in both these cameras is excellent, as both cameras share Nikon's XP7 engine and picture profiles. The colour is classic Nikon. Natural skin tones, strong but not oversaturated greens and blues. I suppose if you like Nikon's look, as most people do, then you'll get that look from both these cameras. Looking at in-body image stabilization, or IBIS, the Z8 has about 5.5 stops of IBIS, whereas the Z6iii has about 8 stops of IBIS, which is incredible and a nice little advantage for the Z6iii here. So if you shoot handheld in lower light situations or with longer focal length lenses, that's a nice plus point you might not have known for the Z6iii. Now, the one thing I haven't mentioned as of yet is the sensor shield on the Nikon Z8. And this is absolutely amazing if you're out changing lenses in the field. It just helps protect your lens from dust and dirt. And that is a big advantage for the Z8. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you about is memory banks. And the Nikon Z8 has these 4 memory banks. And they're absolutely fantastic for changing all your settings. Again, I have a dedicated video on the memory banks and how I set them up. I'm going to leave that in the description down below. On the Z6iii then, we have these user memory banks, U1, U2 and U3. Again, I have a video on how I set these up and I'm going to leave a link to that in the description down below. I have to say though, I much prefer shooting with the memory banks on the Z8 than I do with the user banks on the Z6iii. Looking at card slots now, and the Z8 and the Z6iii both have dual card slots, which is essential for professional use. And as you can clearly see here, they both have an SD card slot and a CF Express Type B card slot. The addition of the CF Express card slot is vital for 8K video and the super fast burst speeds the Z8 is capable of. Looking at video recording now and the recording formats. The Nikon Z6iii records internally at 6K 60p in Nikon's NRAW or ProRes RAW HQ at up to 6K 30p, both of which are 12-bit. You also get ProRes 422 HQ and H.265 10-bit internal recording, plus Full HD up to 240 frames per second, which is great for super slow motion. The Z8 pushes further with 8K 60p in NRAW plus ProRes RAW HQ again, both in 12-bit, and ProRes 422 HQ and H.265. It also offers fast frame rates but tops out at 4K 120p. So in a nutshell, the Z8 has 8K RAW, whereas the Z6iii only goes up to 6K RAW. But the Z6iii can go up to 240 frames per second if you need super slow-mo. Looking at dynamic range for video now, and from what I'm told, the Nikon Z8 has about 14 stops of dynamic range when using 12-bit analog RAW recording, whereas the Z6iii has apparently only about 10.5 stops of dynamic range, again with 12-bit RAW recording. So the Z8 is the clear winner here, if you need that extra dynamic range of course. Looking at oversampling, the Z6iii has full frame oversampled 4K 60p from the 6K readout. The Z8 can oversample 4K 60p from its 8K sensor, when you enable that option of course. So to translate that now, if your focus is super clean 4K 60p, the Z6iii does an amazing job. But if you need 8K resolution, the Z8 is the only tool for you. So this now brings us to rolling shutter in video. The Z8 with its stacked sensor has a readout of about 3.7 milliseconds. So that means your fast pans and movements stay clean and distortion free. The Z6iii has a readout of about 9.5 milliseconds in video, which is already very good and competitive when stacked with direct rivals, but it's nowhere near as good as the Z8. So what it means is if you're concerned about rolling shutter in video, the Z8 is the clear winner for you here. But in saying that, for normal use, I have not noticed any issues whatsoever with the Nikon Z8. So that brings us to which one should you buy. Choose the Z8 if you need maximum resolution for huge prints or for cropping, or if you need serious landscape dynamic range performance, or near perfect electronic shutter for sports. If 8K video or pro wildlife shooting is in your workflow, then you need the Z8. It's as simple as that. Choose the Z6iii if you want the best value hybrid camera with smaller files, oversampled 4K 60 that looks fantastic, 6K options so you can crop and post and still produce awesome full resolution 4K footage, a lighter body, still excellent autofocus and relatively high speed burst options. And don't forget, it has 8 stops of VR and a fractionally better low light performance. Overall, the Z6iii is an outrageously good hybrid camera for the price. And yes, do not forget the price, it's nearly half the price. The real difference isn't about colour or image quality magic, it's about speed and sensor readout. The Z8 is kind of a flagship for a reason, and it wins on resolution and speed. Whereas the Z6iii delivers incredible value, especially if you're focused on 4K video and hybrid shooting. Now, if you had to choose one, which way would you go? Would you go for the Z8 or the Z6iii? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and please do let me know in the comments down below. Or could you not decide between the two of them and stupidly buy both of them, just like me? So yeah, thanks again for watching, and see you out there, or see you in the next video.